poor boy fixed the engine of a limousine in the middle of the road. The boy, Ethan Carter, was on his way home from school when he noticed the sleek black vehicle stranded on the side of the road. The hood was open, steam curling into the cool afternoon air. A driver stood nearby, talking on his phone, while a man in a suit paced impatiently, checking his watch and muttering under his breath. Ethan hesitated for a moment, clutching the strap of his worn-out backpack. He wasn't sure if he should approach, but then he remembered how many times his father had been in similar situations, relying on the kindness of strangers to help when tools or time ran short. Ethan took a deep breath and walked up to them, his sneakers scuffing the pavement. The driver noticed him first, eyebrows raised in mild surprise. "Can I help?" Ethan asked, his voice steady despite his nerves. The suited man glanced at him, taking in his scuffed clothes and messy hair, and dismissed him with a wave of his hand. "We've got it handled, kid," he said sharply, but the driver hesitated. "Actually, sir, the tow truck might be a while, if he thinks he can help." The man sighed loudly and waved Ethan toward the car, clearly skeptical. Ethan approached the engine, his eyes scanning the mess of metal and wires. It didn't take long to spot the problem. A loose belt, a simple fix. He glanced around and found a wrench lying in the driver's open toolbox. "I can tighten this," Ethan said, more to himself than anyone else. He set his backpack down and leaned into the engine. The work came naturally to him. He had spent countless hours in his father's garage, learning how to repair everything from lawnmowers to old trucks. His hands moved deftly, tightening the belt and checking for other potential issues. The man in the suit stood a few feet away, tapping his foot impatiently. "Well," he said, his tone sharp. Ethan didn't answer, just gave the belt one final tug before stepping back. "Try it now," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. The driver climbed into the car and turned the key. The engine roared to life, smooth and steady. The driver grinned and gave Ethan a thumbs up. The man in the suit, however, barely looked at him. He pulled a few bills from his wallet and thrust them toward Ethan. "Thanks, kid," he said curtly before climbing into the back seat. The limousine pulled away, leaving Ethan standing on the roadside, clutching the money in his hand. It wasn't much, but it was something. He shoved it into his pocket and grabbed his backpack. He was late getting home, and he knew his mother would worry. By the time he reached his house, the sun was sinking low in the sky. The small, weathered home looked even smaller next to the garage where his father worked late into the night. Ethan slipped through the door, greeted by the familiar smell of dinner cooking and the faint hum of the evening news on the old television. His mother turned from the stove, her expression a mix of relief and frustration. "Where have you been?" she asked, wiping her hands on a towel. Ethan hesitated, then shrugged. "Fixing a car," he said simply, setting his backpack on the floor. She frowned, but didn't press him. Instead, she ladled stew into a bowl and set it on the table. "Eat," she said. Ethan sat down, grateful for the warmth of the food, even as his thoughts wandered back to the limousine. The next morning, Ethan woke early, the memory of the previous day still fresh in his mind. He dressed quickly and grabbed his backpack, stepping outside just as the sun began to rise. The neighborhood was quiet, the only sounds the occasional bark of a dog or the distant hum of a car engine. He made his way to school, his mind preoccupied with thoughts of the man in the suit. Why had he been so dismissive? And why did Ethan feel so bothered by it? He shook his head, trying to focus on the day ahead. The school day passed in a blur, and Ethan found himself hurrying home once the final bell rang. But as he turned the corner onto his street, he stopped short. There, parked in front of his house, was the limousine. It gleamed in the afternoon sun, a stark contrast to the worn-down houses and cracked pavement of his neighborhood. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered, murmuring among themselves as they stared at the car. Ethan's heart pounded as he approached, his backpack slipping off his shoulder. The driver stood by the car again, and as Ethan drew closer, the back door opened. The man in the suit stepped out, looking as polished and impatient as he had the day before. He saw Ethan and nodded. "Ethan Carter?" he asked, his voice brisk. Ethan nodded, unsure of what to say. The man walked toward him, holding an envelope in his hand. "I wanted to thank you for your help yesterday," he said. "But more than that, I wanted to offer you an opportunity." Ethan blinked, confused. Opportunity, he echoed. The man handed him the envelope, his expression softening slightly. Inside is information about a scholarship, he said. Full tuition, plus support for your family. My foundation helps young people with potential, and I believe you have it. Ethan stared at the envelope, his fingers trembling as he took it. Why me? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man smiled faintly. Because I see something in you, he said. Yesterday, you didn't hesitate to step in and solve a problem. That kind of determination is rare. Ethan's mother stepped out onto the porch then, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. What's going on? She asked, her gaze flicking between Ethan and the man. Ethan turned to her, holding up the envelope. He says it's a scholarship, he said, still struggling to process what was happening. His mother frowned, taking a cautious step closer. A scholarship? For what? The man in the suit explained quickly, outlining the terms and the support his foundation offered. Ethan's mother listened, her expression wary but intrigued. Finally, she nodded. We'll think about it, she said, her voice firm. The man nodded back, stepping into the limousine. Take your time, he said. But don't wait too long. Opportunities like this don't come often. The car pulled away, leaving Ethan and his mother standing in the yard, the envelope clutched tightly in his hand. They went inside, where his father was waiting, his expression a mix of confusion and curiosity. Ethan handed him the envelope, watching as his father's eyes scanned the papers inside. It says here they'll cover tuition and living expenses, his father said, his voice low. He looked up at Ethan, his eyes filled with both hope and doubt. This could change everything. Over the next few days, the Carter family discussed the offer endlessly. Ethan's mother was cautious, worried about strings attached. His father was more optimistic, believing it was a chance worth taking. Ethan himself felt torn. The idea of leaving his school, his friends, and the garage where he spent so much time was daunting. But the thought of helping his family, of lifting the weight of their struggles, was even more compelling. In the end, they decided to take the chance. The first day at the new school was overwhelming. Ravenwood Academy was unlike anything Ethan had ever known. The buildings were grand and pristine, the students polished and confident. Ethan felt out of place in his new uniform, the stiff fabric a constant reminder of how different this world was from his own. He kept his head down, moving through the halls as quickly as he could. The other students barely noticed him, though he caught the occasional curious glance or whispered comment. At lunch, Ethan sat alone, unpacking the sandwich his mother had made for him. He was halfway through eating when a girl with dark hair and a friendly smile approached his table. Mind if I sit here? She asked, her tray balanced in her hands. Ethan nodded, grateful for the company. I'm Sophie, she said, settling into the seat across from him. You're the new kid, right? Ethan nodded again. Yeah, I'm Ethan, he said. Sophie smiled. Welcome to Ravenwood. It's a lot, huh? Ethan chuckled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Yeah, you could say that. Sophie's kindness was a small but significant comfort in those early days. She introduced Ethan to a few other students, helped him navigate the maze of hallways, and even defended him when Logan and his friends started teasing him. Logan was everything Ethan wasn't. Rich, confident, and popular. He took an immediate dislike to Ethan, mocking him for his background and his scholarship. But Ethan refused to let it get to him. He focused on his classes, his determination growing with each passing day. The weeks turned into months, and slowly but surely, Ethan began to find his place at Ravenwood. He excelled in science, earning the respect of his teachers and even some of his classmates. He joined the school's robotics club, where he discovered a talent for building and programming machines. And while he still felt out of place at times, he learned to embrace the differences that set him apart. At home, things were changing too. The monthly stipend from the scholarship allowed his family to catch up on bills and make much-needed repairs to the garage. His father no longer looked so worn, and his mother's worry lines began to fade. Ethan spent his evenings working in the shop, the familiar smell of oil and grease grounding him in a way nothing else could. He was finding a balance between the two worlds he now inhabited, and for the first time in his life, he felt a sense of hope. One evening, as Ethan and his father were finishing up a repair, his father turned to him, a proud smile on his face. "You're doing good, Ethan," he said. "I always knew you'd do something big." Ethan looked at him, the weight of his father's words sinking in. He thought about the man in the suit, the scholarship, and everything that had led him to this moment. "Thanks, Dad," he said quietly. "I couldn't have done it without you." As the sun set and the stars began to appear, Ethan felt a sense of peace he hadn't known before. He still had a long way to go, still had challenges to face, but he knew now that he was capable of overcoming them. He had his family, his friends, and his own determination to guide him, and as he stood there in the fading light, he knew he was ready for whatever came next.